Do you work here?
I'm a visitor.
Right.
So right there in the elevator, she's a woman. There's a man in the elevator. They don't know each other. They walk in. Door closes. She's in a confined space. And he asks her, do you work here? She's obviously allowed to be there. She has a badge, so it's not like he's trying to protect this space from a potential intruder. It's framed as, oh, do you work here? Male interest. And it could be utterly innocuous. On the other hand, what's it like for her, statistically most likely, being on the receiving end of many, many inquiries and bids from men? What's that like for her? Does she really want it? Does she, in the construction of the moment, she's compelled, unless she's going to be very rude, to respond in a civil and polite way. Maybe she doesn't feel particularly friendly or civil or polite in that moment, but she's, got to respond to the implicit demand for a response in that seemingly innocuous question. Do you work here? This is an illustration to me of some of the many themes that we're working with in this show, including she's in a confined space with someone who's a lot bigger than she is. What's that like? And the ways in which seemingly small, innocuous elements in the culture medium that we live in affect us. And we carry them with us, and we have to take them into account. I suspect that the man there he thought he was being friendly. He thought it was flattering in a way to show some kind of interest. Oh, do you work here? Maybe we'll have coffee sometime soon, perhaps. He thinks it's like that, and yet how it lands on her, whatever his intent is, impact is often separate from intent. The impact on her, is not particularly wanted. Then she, shrugs it off and moves on.
There's no tomatoes, there's no salad, there's just cheese and pickle. Do you want it? I'll save it for later.
No. I'll have it. I don't know about pickle though, but I'll have it.
She is coming in not as someone who's meeting him for the first time, of course, but as part of an ongoing assessment, which is her defined role here. She's assessing him. I've done a lot of psychological assessments, never in a forensic setting though, which is what this is, a legal setting. I can't tell yet if he's been convicted, and this is now, he's been sentenced and he's in some kind of locked juvenile facility in which there are guards who run around if need be. I can't quite tell, or maybe she's assessing him for purposes of sentencing and even, relevant to establishing whether he's guilty or not. Don't know. In a situation like this, as a professional, you often have dual loyalties that you have to juggle. You have a kind of ethical duty to the person, and that's a particularly strong ethical duty if the person you're interacting with is a minor, a child, in effect, a young teenager in this case. You also have a duty to your system. You're hired to make determinations that may have consequences that this person you have duties to will not like. How do you juggle and balance that? This is a very complex role here, and we're seeing her already coming in as a strong person who can stand up, including stand up to the male corrections officer there, who's not being initially that helpful, and definitely not treating her probably with the respect I suspect he might to potentially a male psychologist coming in. So we'll see. Let's see how this unfolds. Jamie here initially seems friendly, even almost a little flirty with her in terms of a few facial expressions. So we'll see. He's aware of the fact that she's female, an attractive woman, and he's a young man, probably maybe now edging into 14.
If it makes you happy that I am, Jamie, then I
What do you
am.
call your granddad? Bet you call him Grandpa.
I do not.
I bet you do.
I call him Pop Pop.
What? Do you?
One thing that therapists do, often skillfully, is be aware of the inherent power dynamic which is extremely accentuated in this setting due to both age. She's the adult, he's the child, and the setting. She works for and with the people that have locked him up. And she has a lot of power over him. And skillful therapists are often aware of that, and they'll do things that are authentic and skillful to go one down, to help level the field, to encourage a healthy process in the service of whatever their goals are here. So I'm listening to her, reveal with self-disclosure, which is a vulnerable thing to do in terms of power dynamics, to be self-disclosed, particularly about something related to her own family, her own childhood, and the silly name for her own grandfather, Pup Pup. And you can see that for him, it actually has the skillful effect of softening him a bit, and he gets more open and more in rapport with her as a result.
Would masculine be an okay word to use?
You used it.
When I hear the word masculine, I think they can mend things. They like to make things. They like sports.
So obviously she's flagging masculinity, femininity, male, female, gender here. And she starts out, interestingly, with masculine and how Jamie sees his father and his father's father and his own sense of identity. And she deliberately focuses on positive attributes of masculine because there are positive attributes. And also, though, she's highlighting those. Why is she choosing those first? To mend, to make, sports, pub, socialize, maybe alcohol, but neutral so far. And she's highlighting those aspects, hopefully, as again, skillful means, deliberate from the very start.
If an adult guinea pig eats one of its kids, is that normal or weird? Now what do you call bread?
Come on.
It just feels like a trick.
Trick? Trick into what?
But my dad's okay.
This is so well made. So what you're seeing, what I'm seeing, is, for one, he's friendly in, I won't say flirty, but there's a playfulness which then shifts really quickly. And even in the playfulness, there's a fair amount of what appears to be hostility. He teases her, he pokes at her, and she's, dealing with what's coming at her here. But you can see the intensity and the intelligence in him as he's really tracking that she's not his best friend. She's not his best buddy. She's there to peer into places inside him that he doesn't want anyone knowing about or looking into. And in addition to that general defendedness, not understandable in that setting, but still that general defendedness and his capacity to move into sharp reactivity that we're tracking here, there's the particular protection of his own father and his very shrewd recognition that the therapist here, or I should actually say more like the court-appointed assessor here, is who's not trying to do therapy with him. She's there for assessment. It's a very different purpose. She's trying to get into his relationship with his father and his gender identification, and if his father was perhaps somewhat in the mix of the factors that led Jamie to commit that brutal murder.
Dylan and the other lawyers said, you work for us.
That's not what they say, Jamie, and I know that because I asked them the last time you said that to me.
You talked to them.
I've explained this. I've been employed by your team, but I don't work for you.
What do you tell them?
So 2 things here. One is that he clearly is trying to peer through the BS factor and get to what is this ostensibly so nice person really up to, who has tremendous power over him and is going to be writing an independent report that will affect, we now understand, his sentencing for the crime that he has been convicted of. Very, very, very consequential. And so, understandably, he's being rude even to figure out and get to the bottom of why is she asking him these questions. And he clearly has gotten under her skin. And in a way that would be a yellow flag, she's lost her cool, at least for a moment there. Maybe this is a preview of things to come. but he's gotten under her skin, this 14-year-old at the oldest, and has been able to get her to kind of lose her professionalism, if only for a moment. And of course, it's understandable. I've lost my professionalism, I'm sure, for more than a moment probably, but it's worth noting.
Yes, I've asked some straightforward questions, but I think, am I boring you?
No.
Okay.
And here he's smiling. Yeah, he did get under her skin. He did make her lose her cool. And you can see in the portrayal here of this brilliant young actor, a kind of predatory gleam in his eyes, a coolness, a calculatingness. In his way, he's a force to be reckoned with.
I wanted to talk to you about what being a man feels like.
You want to cock and balls, do you?
You can see how provocative he's being. And adolescents can be this way in treatment environments, deliberately very provocative. And he's dropping in sexualized language here and just seeing if he can, keep her at bay, get under her skin. She rolls with it. Good. And he's not happy in this setting, obviously.
The other boys just scream all the time. And they rock backwards and forwards and they shout at Coronation Street all the way through Curry. One kid goes nuts every time he sees Steve McDonald.
So previously, she has established the structure where she basically says, you're not in charge here. And I don't have to answer your questions. I'm definitely not going to show you my notes and so forth. And here now, even in that context, he's talking over her, he's yelling at her, and she's interrupting him. She's, getting activated herself in a situation in which obviously he can't hear anything she's saying, so anything she says will be unproductive, and yet she's still talking. I think about the acronym of a friend of mine, WAIT, W-A-I-T, why am I talking? Very useful as a therapist to keep in mind that acronym, or WASTE, as in why am I still talking? So we're seeing her, get increasingly activated herself here in all of this, even with this is, I think, just apparently the second conversation. He's also basically, trying to assess, how can you help me? And we can be reminded maybe of Maslow's hierarchy, as it were. And when you're in a situation like this, he's really clear about his very concrete and immediate self-interest. He doesn't really care about the niceties of getting along with an adult or being polite or being a nice boy. He sees her as posh, and he's going to be much more real, because in part, his survival is being threatened here. He's down at the lower levels of Maslow's hierarchy, understandably, in the situation he's in. That said, there are opportunities for her to be more or less skillful with what's in front of her, moment to moment, and basically raising your voice and yelling back, or speaking intensely to someone who's speaking intensely to you is not particularly skillful as a therapist.
You do not control what I do in my life. Get that in that fucking little head of yours. Fucking hell.
Is everything okay?
Oh,
There isn't a problem.
Jamie,
I shouted. I'm sorry.
do you want him to take it out for a bit?
I'll get a cup of tea, though, if that's okay.
Can I have another hot chocolate, please?
So he loses it. Of course, he's really intense. He doesn't hit her. He stands above her. She stays seated. He's really mad, and he doesn't want to be told what to do. And he's mad at her for telling him what to do. We could wonder about complex implications of that, or just take it at face value. That's really straightforward. And then she looks at him with this look of kind of horror and shock and dismay, like, okay, I can see the rage here. I can see you losing it, knocking over the hot chocolate and all the rest of it. And she wonders as well how much of it is a manipulation to get her to go away. Okay. But she was also seeing the intensity in him. And then he settles down a little bit, takes off his jacket. He's now more vulnerable, looks even more like a kind of a young boy, and asks her if she can get him a hot chocolate. Toggling back and forth between being, raging, aggressive, physically dominant person in that situation to asking her if she could, do him a favor and get him a hot chocolate in maybe some kind of maternal way, or just, again, taking his face value. So as a therapist, she's lost control of the situation. She's lost the sense of rapport with him that she needs to have to maintain a flow of disclosure. She's trying to assess. You can't assess someone who's yelling at you or, very plugged in, except observing, they could get very reactive, enraged, physical, and, yelling. Okay, that tells you they can do that. But the why of that, and the possibilities around that, which are relevant to sentencing. What is the capacity of this person, Jamie, to grow, to learn, to have remorse, and to develop greater capacities inside, so he'll never, ever, ever hurt another person, certainly violently again. She needs to know more about his inner world, and she's not getting at his inner world. He's obviously super alert, very defended around the father. A lot of other ways to get at that material and in roundabout ways. We're not seeing efforts made to establish rapport, maybe in the interest of dramatic tension and moving the plot forward, but in a skillful kind of assessment, you definitely want to establish rapport first and foremost, because when that goes out the window, so does your assessment. So let's see what happens next.
I mean, what is it you're looking for? Is it body language stuff? Just I'm reading a book on that at the moment. My sister gave it to me.
Maybe I've grown sensitized to gender in this show, and maybe I'm, seeing things that are not really there, but I find it helpful sometimes to imagine flipping the gender of the people involved. So what if it was a male psychologist and a female correction officer in that same setting? Everything's the same. Would that female have stood that close to the male psychologist looking at the screen? Would that person have spoken up and interrupted to the point of startling the psychologist when they're focused on the screen? I don't know. And definitely, I really wonder if that would have happened if it was the same corrections officer and a male psychologist. Just body language and being willing to be that close physically to another person, but in ways that might be read potentially as intimidating or threatening, and a certain pushiness on the part of the corrections officer when it is clearly unwanted. She's trying to focus. She's trying to do her job. She doesn't want to hear about the book he got about body language. So again, thinking about expectations, like on the one side, maybe some expectations of entitlement that due to being male, in this culture, I get to do certain things that I'm allowed to do or are normative, that they don't cause much attention if I do them as a male, and yet as a woman, if a woman were to do them, it would cause attention. And then flip the other way, as a woman, I need to kind of accept or put up with that kind of behavior coming at me, even if it's not ill-intended. He's not thinking of assaulting her, obviously, the corrections officer. But even so, do you really want that? And I remember a different kind of conversation I had with a friend of mine who happened to be an African-American woman, and I said something unskillful, and I came to her later and apologized, and it was just, I blurted it. It wasn't overtly racist or anything. It was just unskillful in terms of its impact on her. And she said essentially, Rick, it's okay. I know your heart and so forth. But, if I reacted to every time something like that happened in a day, it would just make me crazy. The death of 1,000 paper cuts. And that's something to take into account, what it's like for what people feel they sort of have to put up with just to kind of get through a day that you don't have to put up with, perhaps. The second thing here is that I'm watching her approach and, second guessing, Monday morning quarterbacking. And, what we're seeing, she's taking a very cognitive approach. And this is a kid who is also awash in emotion and clearly not that well regulated, emotion just bursting through. And she's trying to get him to talk about, masculinity as an abstraction, cognitively. It just doesn't get there. And as a therapist, all too often I've approached things through a more cognitive level that just wasn't helpful and was much more effective, often takes longer, but it pays off more in the long run, is to just kind of stay with the feeling level, explore more neutral topics, even more positive topics, and see what happens between the two of them. I mean, in a way, he's demonstrating what he really thinks about being a man. He's demonstrating it. And he would demonstrate it a lot more if she got out of the head level and moved more into the heart and the body in her interactions with him. He could tell her his beliefs, his cognitions, whatever, about men, women, and bananas, but is that consequential? What's really consequential is the deep down, hardly conscious, fundamental attitudes that he may not even be aware of. So trying to ask him rationally with a lot of complicated language about abstractions like masculinity, it's just not a very effective approach.
How does your dad treat your mum?
Are you trying to get at my dad again?
No.
Here too, critical tone about his father. Obviously a sore subject. He's obviously already very protective of that father. And her tone around that is harsh. It's got a lot of velocity in it. And she's leaning forward in her body language. It's kind of almost accusatory. It's prosecutorial. It's the kind of question you'd ask a hostile witness on the stand. And not effective.
He's not going to get any more pictures, though, is he?
No, she's dead.
I didn't mean from her. I meant from other girls. No one will send him any of her pictures because he wasn't careful with the one he got.
This is really an amazing way for me to watch a show that's so powerful, in which I'm allowing myself to pause from time to time, just to let it really land, let it really sink in. Of course, this is fiction, and it helps to imagine our way into that which is real here, and let ourselves be affected by it. So I'm just really reflecting on adolescent sexuality. Freud caused quite a scandal when he talked about infantile sexuality, or the sexuality of certainly some young kids who would pleasure themselves and potentially have fantasies of various kinds that would be uncovered in psychoanalysis. That was quite a scandal. And we also have a culture that's hypersexualized, and with technologies like in this case, Snapchat, imagery can be widely circulated. Just one phone, internet uploaded, you have no control over that image, whatever happens to it. And then you think about, what was it like to be Kate? The pressures of various kinds for a 13-year-old girl to do something that's fairly taboo. What led her to do that? What was in the mix? How volitional was that? How much pressure was there on her, perhaps, to do that? What was that like for her? And then to be exposed in that way, with other people passing around the picture of her. And then him, what a complex mix. I wonder how much here for him was being actually drawn to Katie, in even innocent, simple ways, like having a crush on her and really liking her, or how much of it was that he thought he should have a response to her His initial statement to the therapist, or rather the psychologist, the assessor here, is he lies about his sexual experiences. Of course, he might be lying about lying, but he's lying about he lies initially to, brag about them in effect, or to act like he's had them, but he hasn't had them, seemingly so far. So maybe he just thought he ought to approach her. On the other hand, why did he bring a knife? And why did he ask his friend to give him a knife, his knife, who's now in trouble too, just to scare her? Why did he want to make her feel fear? Maybe he felt some fear or shame related to her, but why? Why is he trying to scare her? So we'll keep finding out here. But what a mess. What I'm seeing in his behavior toward her, it's more around fear and anger and shame than anything else. You can see his vulnerability to shame in the account of his father, watching him and turning away with disappointment when Jamie, as a younger boy, even messed up playing football. And it could well be that in this case, it's not so much about sexual desire. And it's sometimes said that rape is really about aggression and violence and anger and domination, much more than it is around sexuality. Sexuality is maybe a means to the end of establishing dominance and being violent. And it could be that motivations of that kind that are not particularly eroticized, that are about shame and retribution and deeply buried and repressed rage, boiling out in the worst dozen seconds of his entire life so far. Maybe that's much more of what's in play here.
You don't think you're pretty. You do think I'm ugly.
I haven't passed judgment on either of those things, if you think about it, for very good reason.
Oh, for very good.
Here he is getting emotional. He's counterattacking very cleverly in his case. And she's getting more and more rational, more and more cognitive, with increasingly complicated language, rather than letting him express himself, letting him vent, and then in that way, in so doing, settle back down again. I also have a lot of empathy for her and her role. What a role. It's one that I've personally avoided, partly because it's so challenging, and there are people who are very, very, very good at it. So I feel for her being in this situation with the demand on her to form some kind of professional conclusion that she'll be judged by. Still, in the process here, you're seeing her do things that disrupt her aims, which is to try to peel back the onion and take layers of lids off the cans and get down deeper and more deeply into who this kid really is. And also in particular, in terms of sentencing, the forces in him making who he will become. And she's not getting there with these kind of ways of acting, unless she just is trying to provoke him into, another reenactment of the kind of rage we saw in his murder. And but that's not very informative.
Reason.
I want to understand you.
To understand my understanding of my understanding of my understanding.
Yes.
He's very clever. He's getting it. He's naming it. You, the therapist, want to understand my understanding of my understanding of my understanding of my understanding. Cognitive, beliefs, all the way down. BS. He knows it's BS. And he wonders what's really behind it all, of course. And if she has any sincere interest in getting to know him as a being, unlike anyone else in his world has ever really been equipped or sustained an attempt to really get to know him underneath the defenses and the anger and the hurt and the shame. If she's really wanting to do that, she wouldn't be approaching him in the way that she is. And at some level, he knows that.
She wrote this. No.
So she's sitting close to him here, and he's shown that he could be physically aggressive in ways that could really be pretty intense. The previous scene in which she's remaining seated in the chair and he's getting really close to her, so close he could hit her easily if he wanted to. And then he, startles her by yelling at her, and she's, shocked and some fear. It takes a lot of courage to be in her role there, in her position. I'm thinking that, she's had this job. She's worked in correctional facilities with violent people. And here she's with someone who, in a rage, was repeatedly stabbed with some intent. He brought a weapon with intent, not necessarily to stab her, but he brought it to the encounter. And she's being willing to remain physically vulnerable to see what he does, And sometimes as a therapist, certainly, you need to do that. And you need to let the intensity come and see what's there, while both, protecting yourself ultimately and keeping your professional hat on. You're there to do a job. You have a duty to this other person and to their ultimate welfare. In her case as well, she also has a duty to society. How does she manage that? So it's interesting to me that she kind of toggles back and forth in her way of being between being fairly prosecutorial, rat-tat-tat-tat-tat, trying to get to the bottom of things, and then shifting into being kind of jokey, a little relaxed, getting him a cup of hot chocolate. And that may be effective technique. I don't do forensic assessments, but I have a hunch it's not very effective technique, including with a 13 or 14-year-old kid, and definitely in ordinary therapeutic environments. That oscillation back and forth is just not very good technique. And generally speaking, being prosecutorial at all is not good technique.
AT wrote this on your Facebook feed.
Facebook.
Instagram.
Are you all right? You look a bit red. Did I scare you when I shouted?
So Jamie's asking her, first he teases her about using, Facebook, like a grown-up term that's at odds with his actual lived experience as a younger person. So he's caught her out there and he's teasing her, and he's also poking at her about being a little red in the face. And then he is challenging her about her real response to him. Did I scare you when I shouted at you? And so much about being a therapist, and often in other helping professions, is you're constantly making choices. How do I go? You have different options here, again and again and again. And people who are skillful at this keep making choices that tend to be best odds choices. They're not guaranteed, but again and again and again, it's the best play they've got given the cards they're holding in that moment. And including which, when someone who's being aggressive, he's mad, and he's trying to reestablish his own power in the situation, which would be in the service of his own disclosure. As long as she keeps him in a one-down position or reminds him of that in what is already a one-down position, that's going to intensify his defenses. And so he's going to be less revealed and open, probably. And so here he is being aggressive, which actually in a certain kind of way establishes more of an equivalence in power, which if she could be more spacious around it in her role here and make more room for it, might actually lead him to being increasingly open. She hasn't formed any kind of, we could say, alliance with him in which they have a shared purpose. She's not saying to him, in effect, I'm here to help you have the best possible outcome from this whole legalistic process in ways that are grounded in the real truth of things. I'm not here to harm you. I'm here to find what would be really beneficial for you and society as a whole. Can we do this together? There's no sense of together here. There's no sense of alliance, as we say with clients. And maybe she's not allowed to do anything like that. Maybe she's really constrained in that. I suspect for dramatic effect that she's not doing much of that. All that said, here he is, asking her for her real reaction. And in effect, did I have power here? Did I scare you? Not in the best way, not just defending it, but did I have power? And what can she do? And I think one skillful option, which she doesn't take, she goes down a different road. One skillful option would be to take a breath and go, yeah, I did feel scared. Long pause, and then maybe maintain the silence, which she's not doing either, to make room for him to speak. And she could also potentially then say after that, yeah, I felt scared. And I felt sad, actually, at the whole situation here, and that you're in this situation. And yeah, you scared me. In that moment, Jamie, you were scary. Pause. How does he react to that? Does he like being scary? Is there a glint of pleasure in his eyes that, yeah, I'm scary? And is there maybe an opening based on her being real? Yeah, I felt scared, which she obviously did, at least momentarily. And then is there an opening even to follow up with something like, and knowing that you scared me, how does it feel to know that you did scare me and could potentially scare me again? How is that for you? She really wants to find out, right? Because she really is trying to establish risk for the future related to sentencing and guidelines. How at risk is this kid? How much does he really like scaring people, particularly female people? She would learn a lot, right, if she went down that road with him. And in the moment, here I am, right, watching the play of the game, freeze framing. Well, you could always do this or do that. I tell you, it's tough in the moment. I've rewound so many sessions and gone back and thought, oh, Rick, what in the world were you thinking? Freud called it the impossible profession for a reason, maybe, although I think it's an heroic and noble profession, and very often a very helpful one for other people. It reminds me of the line from a Zen master, a very successful, accomplished teacher toward the end of his life, and he was asked what he made of his life, and he kind of chuckled and said, one mistake after another. So, there's probably been a lot of my own career.
She wrote this on your
I mean, I'm only 13. I don't think I look that scary.
So here he is asserting that he's not that scary and therefore deserves to be let out soon, maybe. He's also, in effect, shaming her. He's counterattacking to say, hey, I'm not that scary. You must be particularly weak or something wrong with you that you would let just a little 13-year-old like me scare you. And we often see that in certain situations, people who've been on the receiving end of domination. I talked about this a bit in the second episode with regard to the son of the police inspector who's, being shamed, and also other people in that situation in the social hierarchy being put down. Anyway, people who are, in the subordinate one down position sometimes reverse and really look for anything that will put them in that top dog position. There's a proverb that some people are either at your feet or at your throat, and it's that toggling back and forth as a kind of reaction to being put down so much. And we're kind of seeing Jamie here assert his strength, his position vis-a-vis this psychologist.
Could you tell me what these emojis
Oh,
are?
how embarrassing is that?
So you see her refusing to step into the script or frame that he's trying to draw her into. And she is maintaining her professionalism and continuing to go after the particular question on the table rather than get into her own personal material out loud with him. And sometimes that's the right way to do it. Just to get into your own material is just inappropriate, in a psychological framework from time to time. That said, I keep wanting her to bring it into the room, as it were. It's in the room. Right now, as I said earlier, his behavior is saying so much more than the words, the abstractions coming out of his mouth. And his behavior is demonstrating his reactions to being put down or being subject to female power. And you think about his reactivity to being subject to Kate's power through a female body. She shoved him, he fell down. It flipped into a rage right afterward. Here he is, demonstrating his own psychology, his own reactivity, his own learned behaviors, and sense of how it's okay for him to be with regard to this this woman here who's being strong, and he's demonstrating how he feels about that. And as a psychologist, I would wish that she would go with that, and she'd learn a lot more about him if she would do that, rather than going back to these emojis, which she knows must be very shaming and triggering for him. Maybe that's what she's trying to see, what he does, when he really gets at the whole incel, humiliating accusation or characterization of him. Maybe that's what she's doing. A lot. She seems in her head herself. Well-intended, of course, but in her head herself. And how do you connect with a young teenager, when you're coming at them from this very heady place? Not usually very, very effective.
Look at you, all hopeful, like I'm going to say something important.
So at this point, the whole incel manosphere topic is on the table, 80-20, and him being really shamed in this particular way. Maybe in other times, people might have shamed him, calling him a sissy, or he's not into sports, or, he has a funny way of speaking. Kids shame and put down other kids. This is a particularly intense one. Really gets at emerging identity as a sexual being, as becoming a man. So that's going on. And then in this moment, I keep seeing Jamie moving back and forth between being an upset boy who is understandably in a tough situation, a terrible situation, really rattled, wants this hot chocolate, and yet, like right here, the look he's giving her, the way he's switching, how he's catching her out, how he's turning the tables on her, it starts to feel kind of sociopathic. The cleverness, even sometimes called a reptilian quality, a coldness. And it's just kind of spooky. It's extraordinarily difficult, of course, to make these kind of recommendations as a forensic psychologist and then a judge who has to make decisions, and then other people down the road. Who is this person? Who is this person becoming? And what here is sociopathic, or what is the seed of sociopathy that, unfortunately, being in prison can fertilize in water and grow into a full-blown sociopathic personality disorder.
It's like, or flat or whatever. So I thought when she was like that weak, she might like me.
When she was that weak, she might like me. You see the softness in his face here, and the longing. What a mess. And his sense that she would have to be weakened, made weak, or put into a weak position. And then a low status, subordinated incel like him would be acceptable to her. If she, this notion that she'd have to sink down to his level. He presumes he's at this level. That's the incel structure. He's in the 80% that most girls would not like. So she's got to sink down to his social standing, his degree of attractiveness, and then he might have a chance. It's a real terrible doctrine, obviously, and it's prevalent in the world today, especially of young men. It's completely untrue. It's ridiculous and justifies all kinds of terrible behavior. And it's it's terrible. It's toxic in the minds of the people that are on the receiving end of that dogma that some people are, putting out there.
I could have touched her, but I didn't. I had a knife. She was scared, but I didn't do that.
We don't know, of course, what the psychologist is feeling here exactly. I mean, what I see in her face is a sadness, and one that, as her lips part slightly, feels very personal, as she maybe identifies with Katie. Maybe her own history has included sexual assault or the threat of it, or unwanted erotic attention. And she's seeing here, and she's also seeing Jamie. She's seen the video of him lying and denying and not really coming clean about what he did, which has implications for his prognosis, as it were, including his movement or not into real sociopathy. She's seeing that, and we feel the weight of it on her. And in some ways, I think we're seeing her see a lot of Jamie's fate. Jamie's going to be in the system now for, I don't know what the duration would be, certainly through his 18th birthday and probably beyond. His life is forever changed. Many lives have been forever changed by what happened there that night, but certainly his as well. And she's seeing that, she's feeling that, and still she has to make a judgment. She has to make a decision here. So Jamie here has just described, or has gotten as close to a description as he has so far of an horrific event, and then kind of shrugs, turns, reaches for the sandwich. And yeah, he's a kid, and still there's something pretty cold about all that.
Jamie, do you understand what death is?
What?
So here she goes to an abstraction. Maybe she has to do it for mental competency on a judgment here. It seems she's concluded that he basically needs to understand that he's murdered someone, and she's trying to get at, does he have the cognitive capability to understand that? I imagine he does. He's a clever kid.
Jamie, this is our last session.
What?
But what I would encourage you to
Why?
do, whatever happens next, is take advantage of any mental health services that are
No,
offered to you.
why?
I think you'll...
I know she's not a therapist. I know, or that's not her function there. And wow, I mean, my hunch is that inside her, understandably, you're a mental health professional, you still have your reactions, and it could well be that inside her she's angry at Jamie. Maybe she's disgusted with him. She's had it with his stories and his weaving, and maybe that's in the mix here. And still, to just, this is our last session, which completely startles him and reveals that he actually in some ways experiences a kind of a relationship with her, and he doesn't want it to end. And also, I suspect he knows that if it ends, it means she's formed a judgment about him, which she won't reveal, but it's a judgment that will be consequential. And certainly her tone and energy toward him is very cold. Sometimes neutrality reads negatively when you're on the receiving end of it, the impact of it, even if the intent is neutral. And she clearly here is just very crisp, very cold in her demeanor as she is cutting off and ending this relationship, which of course is having a big impact on him and is certainly not kind in the managing of the ending. Therapists will use a term termination, not like the CIA is terminating you, but just termination. This is not being handled in a way that has the best interest of the child in mind.
Oh, don't even like me a bit!
Jamie, come on, man, please. Okay? Jim.
What did you think about me then?
Okay.
So important to him to be liked, and so human. He wonders, does she like him even a little bit? just independent even of gender and all the rest of that, and just makes you really wonder what has happened in the life of this kid, whose parents seem in their way loving and caring and kind. He's got a big sister. She seems kind in her own way. And it highlights for me a little bit here research findings that speak to the impact of peer groups, such as there's so much in the mix here, at school and elsewhere. Peers begin to start having even more influence than parents over the psychological development of kids, including starting at a fairly early age. I know for myself that, my relationships with kids in school, in which I felt very much like an outsider and kind of shy and dorky and, like an ugly duckling, definitely, the runt of the litter, as someone might say, that had a lot of impact on me and does have a lot of impact. And sometimes we underestimate in the developmental story or trajectory of a person the influence of friendships, peer groups, and experiences in that territory, starting even pre-adolescent and then certainly continuing through adolescence into adulthood. And I just so feel for Jamie, and I also feel for the psychologist there who could say essentially, I do like you, but I suspect she doesn't like him. And she's maintaining her demeanor, but she's horrified by what he did and still horrified by his unwillingness to express or seem to show any remorse whatsoever, or even sorrow. He hasn't expressed one bit of sorrow, even if he holds on to his defense that somebody else did it. He could be sorrowful about the loss of this girl that he wanted to take to the fair and hoped that by her dropping in her status, she'd be willing to say yes. So I suspect the psychologist doesn't like him that much. And by the way, it goes to a broader thing as well. I know for myself, working with people, that I always had to find what there was to like about them. Otherwise, I couldn't do my job. It did not mean I was missing the rest of it. But if you're working with people in a mental health kind of way, it's it's counterindicated for you to continue in a role if you can't find a way to like someone. And maybe the best you can do is then to refer them on to somebody else who could find something likable in them. And beyond all that, one time I had a client who said to me quite vulnerably and sweetly, "But do you like me? I want you to like me." And I looked inside. I said, "Yeah, I do like you. I do like you. And even more important than liking you is duty." Liking can rise and fall depending on situations. Duty, moral duty, professional duty, code of conduct as a professional psychologist prevails, so that's in the mix as well. And then here we have poor Jamie being hustled out of the room. He's had this contact, even with a fair amount of intensity and critique and disruption and coldness coming at him from the psychologist. Still, it's a real relationship. And in that real relationship, he is asking that question that often hovers invisibly in the space between people. Do you like me? Will you come out and play? It's very haunting and deep. And sometimes I think it's really helpful to try to bring your own unspoken thought bubbles actually out, and to be strong enough and appropriate enough in the setting to be able to do that, such as, I hope you like me. Do you like me? Is there anything I could do that would help you to like me, or like me even more, or like me in a particular way? To have the capacity to do that, and also to be aware of that unspoken longing and question in the thought balloons over other people's heads. Do you like me? Will you hurt me? Am I safe with you? Do you respect me? Are you on my side? And these are very haunting and deep and poignant questions that are really useful to be aware of, and then we find our way in how to respond to them.
Tell him I'm okay!
Tell him yourself, okay? Jenny, calm down, okay?
Tell him I'm okay, please!
And here as well, it's the father that he's clearly most connected to of his parents, and that he wants her to tell that he's okay, even as he is so clearly banging on the window, not at all okay. And now here she is. I've had sessions like this. I probably have wept after a particularly wrenching session, and to just feel it. You know, when you're in mental health, helping profession, it's not like you're a carpenter working with a particular board that has no feelings, and the board doesn't hit you when you're trying to, nail it down and all the rest of that. And with people, you get affected. You get really affected. I read somewhere that a commentary about this show in this scene here, where she's, tearful and obviously really affected and upset by this, that somehow it was to portray the boy as an aggressor or somehow try to play on our sympathy. I don't read that at all. She seems like really quite an experienced and even tough professional. And still, it's gotten to me. And I'm not even in the room with Jamie. And here she is, obviously affected by it, of course. If you were the kind of person who could do that process with him and conclude, as I imagine she has, that he really needs to be held in custody for quite some time, if you're not affected by that, you don't belong in that profession.